Good. I'm Anthony Bainey. I'm here with Michael Kuzma, a local lawyer and activist. We'll talk about the 2024 election. How you feeling today, Michael?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. What do you think about the 2024 election so far?
Well, initially I was supporting RFK Jr. In fact, Jim Ostrowski, his wife, and I met him when he was in West Seneca. I believe it was April of this year. I was pretty impressed by RFK. His presentation was phenomenal, and I was disappointed. I actually sent money to his campaign. I bought the yard sign, was ready to rock and roll. What impressed me about RFK Jr. was his connection to Dennis Kucinich. Who's currently running for the House, is the former mayor of the city of Cleveland, served in the House for a number of years. When I worked at City Hall at the Common Council here in Buffalo, my colleagues and I would actually go to Cleveland and help Dennis on his congressional runs. In addition, I served as a delegate for Dennis at least once, may have been a second time, but New York has this weird delegate system if you're running for president. So David Franzek, myself, and others serve. You have to run a slate in each congressional. I forget. It's not each congressional district, but it's a majority of congressional districts. So I'm very impressed with Dennis, and the fact he was supporting RFK was quite appealing. In addition, Tulsi Gabbard is now working with RFK, and they're both supporting Donald Trump. But when Tulsi was the last person running in the Dem primary in 2020, I supported Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, the 2020 election was very interesting. I ended up voting for Howie Hawkins. And then with the 2024 election, the primary has been very interesting for the Democrats. What are your thoughts on the Democratic primary with it, leading with Kamala being the ultimate candidate with Biden stepping aside?
Well, I really having worked for the party. Just to give you some background, I worked for the Erie County Legislature from '96 to 1999, and for years I was unaffiliated. I became a Democrat maybe midway through my 3 year tenure at the county legislature. So I'm totally disgusted with the Democratic Party. It's not even a party, it's become a cult. And a lot of people don't realize that during the pandemic, or scamdemic, as Cindy Sheehan calls it, they changed the law. They being Andrew Cuomo, another piece of work. My dealings with him go back to his days as HUD secretary. But anyway, during the pandemic, the Democratic legislature and the governor supported this change in the petitioning law, which pretty much eliminated third parties. And if you look at our ballot, you really have no option. You either have the Republican candidates, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, or you have Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. So Jill Stein didn't make the ballot. And if you write in a candidate, the way it works in New York, at least in Erie County, unless you notify the Board of Elections that you're running a write in campaign, a write in vote is not counted. So if you write in Jill Stein, I don't know what she's doing, perhaps you know, but they don't count those votes. And
I
given
mean,
it's a
I do.
state, yes. So with a state, so if you have races in every county, what would a candidate have to do? Notify the commissioners of each board of election in all 62 counties in New York State? So it's really for folks who aren't too happy with the choices. It's a difficult choice. What do you do? Write in someone's name and find out that vote won't even count?
Yeah, I mean, I do know that when I ran for assembly as a write-in candidate, I did have to notify the Board of Elections that I was doing that and that I was going to look for a count at the end. So that is a very good question in terms of the third-party candidates like Chase Oliver and Dr. Jill Stein. Have they notified all of the county Board of Elections that they're doing the write-in? Will they be, asking for an exact count after the, certification process? That's a very good question. I don't have the answer to. And I agree with you 100% that the changing of the laws, and it was actually through a budget uh, process. So the governor can submit legislation through the budget approval, and that's actually how they did the changing of the ballot access laws. So it was very under the wind, or it was under the radar. My apologies. And so I think a lot of people didn't even realize that was happening. But
Yeah, that's correct. The Libertarians and the Green Party got together. I was involved in the litigation initially with Jim Ostrowski, and it
thank
was
you.
filed in the Southern District of New York. And the judge was, I thought both parties raised some really good arguments. There was a really sharp attorney on the Libertarian side who was helping. His name wasn't on the papers, but the judge rejected all the arguments throughout the case. He said everything was just peachy. The case was argued in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, and both parties were handed their heads. So that's the state of the law. And from what I recall, New York now has probably the most difficult petitioning process or requirements, the most burdensome requirements, making it literally impossible for third parties to get on the ballot.
Yeah, so far only the working families and conservative party are the only parties besides the Democrat and Republicans, and I'm sure you know that they don't really run, local candidates by any means, and if any at the governor level. So
Yeah, years ago when you still had the Independence Party, the Dems and the Republicans would take turns take running that party, if you will. They would have Democratic operatives run as committee people, and then they would anoint some pliable chairperson to head the party. But you don't even have that anymore. The working families is just a rubber stamp for the Dems. And then the conservatives locally have Ralph Larigo running the party. And statewide, I'm not even sure who's in charge, but there's really not much difference between, say, the Republicans and the conservatives and the Dems and the Working Families Party. But given this horrible mess we find ourselves in, I'm going to end up voting for Donald Trump. I'm very alarmed at what the Democratic Party has become and some of the things they're proposing. They pose a very serious threat to the First Amendment. You hear former Senator Clinton talking about so-called misinformation. Tim Walz says the First Amendment doesn't protect misinformation. Well, who's to determine what misinformation is? Half of what they put out is mis or disinformation. So that's very scary. In addition, I think Kamala Harris is the lightweight. I did my undergrad work in California. I'm very alarmed at her connections with Willie Brown, who served in the California state legislature. He was also the mayor of San Francisco. I know she ran for district attorney. At the time, she was an assistant district attorney, and her predecessor, I think his name was Terrence, yeah, Hallinan. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He was actually investigating corruption on the part of Willie Brown. And Kamala Harris, it's a well-known fact. She was dating Willie Brown, and the minute she got into the district attorney's office, she quashed the investigation into Brown and his cronies. So that concerns me. The other thing that, I mean, there's a number of issues with Kamala Harris. I mean, the fact she doesn't talk about her experience in Montreal. She spent most of her life in Canada. She didn't come from a working class background. She came from a privileged background. Both of her parents were professors. And she, from what I understand, lived in a more affluent area of Montreal. She doesn't even discuss that. So her what she did to Cherie Peoples is troubling. She had this truancy program in California where they would arrest the parents of children who did not, had excessive absences from school. In the case of Cherie Peoples, this poor woman, her daughter was very sickly, missed a lot of school, but yet Kamala Harris had this poor woman do the perp walk. She was arrested, was on television. Her reputation was sullied. And Kamala Harris had no problem with this. And uh, she's awful. She called it the war on truancy. What other wars is she going to start? That's the other thing. Wars in general. Trump, is he a character? Without a doubt. Hey, we had no wars. Now we got a war in Ukraine. We have a war in the Middle East. A war. What has she done? What is she going to do to stop this? I see no peace proposals. So I'm very troubled. We're in a very bad place. Do I wish someone else? I would love to see Dennis Kucinich running again, but guess what? It's not happening. So, given all the things that are going on in the country, I'm gonna blot out the little bubble for Donald J. Trump and J.D. Vance, and I'm happy he's got our RFK Jr. involved and Tulsi Gabbard. I think there's enough people around him that he's really not going to get off the rails. Do I wish he wouldn't say some of the things he says? Yeah, without a doubt. But that's what I'm going to do. I think Waltz and Harris are a much more dangerous threat to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.